Good afternoon and welcome everybody to the September meeting of the Corporate Policy and Development Scrutiny Panel. Just to remind everyone that this meeting is being webcast, so please can we make sure that microphones are on, and if I'm sure while we know each other, please can we introduce ourselves for the hundreds and thousands who will be watching this panel online. And having said that, I introduce myself as Councillor Robin Moss, Chair of this panel. First of all, can we have the emergency evacuation procedure, please?
When the continuous alarm bell sounds, you must evacuate the building by one of the designated exits and proceed to the named assembly point. The designated exits are signposted. Arrangements are in place for the safe evacuation of disabled people.
Thank you very much. Do we have any apologies on substitutions?
Apologies from Councillor Ian Halsall.
Thank you very much. Any declarations of interest? Looking around, not. And as I usually say, if anything crops up during the discussion and you believe there's a conflict, please flag it up for the minutes. Better safe than whatever. There is no urgent business, and we have got no public or councillor statements. So we'll go straight into the minutes, the confirmation as a correct record for the 8th of July meeting, also the 25th of March, which we weren't able to confirm our July meeting. Are we happy to accept both of those as a correct record? Thank you, Toby. Have we got a second? Hal? Thank you. Then we have a Cabinet Member update. Unfortunately, Mark Elliott can't be with us, so welcome Kevin Guy, who will be giving us a Cabinet Member update. Across to you, Kevin.
Thank you, Chair. As you're aware, unfortunately, Councillor Elliott has had a family bereavement, so can't be here with us today. You've got the two main reports in front of you. I'm happy to answer any questions with officers on those reports, but I'm also conscious to take away feedback on the speed in which you members get reports, so you have enough time to read them and then look at them and then ask questions about them. So I've taken that away as feedback from yourselves and from Councillor Elliott, but I'm more than happy to hand over to the officers to proceed. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Kevin. Have we got any direct questions at this point? I'm happy with the written reports. Okay, so we'll move on first of all to the Q1 monitoring report. Gary, to introduce.
Thank you, Chair. Gary Adams, Head of Financial Management. So this report presents the first early stage financial overview for 25-26 financial year. It's the report that was discussed at the Cabinet meeting in July. It's worth highlighting that the approach we've taken to reporting the revenue position in this report has changed, and this is to reflect the fact that due to the limited information that's available, we've really got 2 months actual data to meet that July Cabinet reporting deadline, which can lead to a worst case scenario being presented. So we've therefore provided a risk-based assessment of those services that are at the highest risk of a material over or under spending. And this is based on whether there was any material variance in the prior year, 24-25, that was likely to continue into this year, or if there are any emerging 25-26 risks that need noting. Paragraph 3.5 of the main report, which is Appendix 1, covers the key service risks. I'll pull out a few of these. I won't go through every one. The main one, which is in line with the position we reported at the outturn last year, is Children's Services Social Care, where the Council continues to experience demand pressures in its residential placements. We did add in quite a lot of growth due to kind of demand and demographic pressures in the 25-26 budget. But since that budget was set, we've had 8 new placements towards the end of last year, which have a kind of financial impact of about 2.7 million on those placements. And we had a further 4 in Q1, which cost around about 1.5 million, with a risk of further placements during the remainder of the year. So we'll keep looking at that pressure, but the risk forecast given in that area is between kind of 4 and 8 million, so it remains our most significant revenue pressure at the moment. When we brought the outturn report to this panel, it was also noted the pressure in terms of visitor numbers on our Raymond Bar submissions, and that was having an impact on income targets. That's in line with other visitor attractions that rely on an element of international visitors, so we're not unique to that, and there is a kind of trend with those types of attractions. Current projections based on the last 6 months' data are that the budgeted 1.1 million visitors will be a little bit below that, probably around about 50k. So that is factored into a risk-based potential budget shortfall for this year. Against that, there are a couple of early estimates offer favourable variances relating to parking income and also treasury management, borrowing and interest costs, which could mitigate some of those pressures. Paragraph 3.6 covers the initial review of savings performance, and there's a current forecast of achievement of 10 million of the 14 million being achieved at this early stage. In paragraph 3.9, it does highlight when we were setting the 25-26 budget, Councillor Elliott flagged, and I think we mentioned to this committee that there was a high level of risk around the budget with increasing demand pressures and some of those being quite volatile. So in response to that, we did include a level of 9.8 million of corporately held contingencies aligned to some of those risks. These are set out, as I said, in paragraph 3.9, and we'll be considering allocation of those to offset service pressures once we've done the detailed monitoring Q2, so we'll have a kind of more accurate forecast there. That was all I was going to highlight. Obviously, I'll open it up to any specific questions on the report.
Any questions at this point? Hal?
With regard to the international visitors, does this actually explain the difference in numbers? Is it purely, and if we think of international, are we talking Chinese or are we talking America? Do we know where these people aren't coming from?
Thank you, Hal, for that. I have regular briefings from Rob, who's the Head of Services for Heritage, and there's a really interesting and quite detailed analysis done by a national body of incoming tourists based on flights, where they come from around the world, arrivals in UK airports. And the Chinese market has not fully recovered from COVID. The American market has bounced back, but overall visitor numbers, interestingly with the exception of Edinburgh Castle, they're down universally. And quite interesting, I think the British Museum's numbers are down considerably. So our trend is in line with UK inbound flight details as well. So with the interesting international situation, it's quite, it's not unexpected for international visitors not to have fully returned to post-COVID levels yet.
Just to come back, I think it's someone, or it came up somewhere, that actually, although the numbers were down, the spend was up.
Yes, so you will have seen that the Roman Baths itself has been given accreditation for one of the best visitor attractions, if not the best in the UK, and that is based on value for money in the return surveys. And interestingly, the spend per individual has increased. So although the numbers are down on what was expected, the actual income is up based on the numbers we've received. So that's a big, and I think you should big credit to the heritage team who do a marvellous job. And I think we'd all agree that it's a 5-star plus asset that any council would chop their right arm to have.
I have a couple more, but I'll let the rest go.
Anyone else? Any questions? Gavin first.
Hi.
Hal, your mic's on.
With regards to the children's services, you've stated that there's 8 new residential placements. The surge of 8 new residential placements over the end part of last year, which resulted in an extra £2.7 million. Just to clarify, that's per placement £337,500. Is that correct?
Yeah, that would be the average cost. It obviously varies depending on the need of the placement, but yeah, that would be the average over these 8 new placements.
Okay, and that's for that is not unaccompanied asylum seekers. That's people that are young people that are in our care. Is that correct?
As I understand it, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Can I just confirm that's in line with what we're seeing in the rest of the country? I don't think there's any accident that hedge funds are getting into residential care, as it's a closed market with seemingly rising profits. Kevin.
Yeah, thank you, Jay. An excellent point. And to that point, I think with scrutiny in general and probably working alongside the Children's Scrutiny Board, it's a point that I've raised with the chairs about actually doing some policy development work within scrutiny. And I would say it's not a unique situation across the United Kingdom where the private sector is basically exploiting authorities and the government when it comes to these type of contracts. There are some good examples of councils around the country that have opened their own children's homes for the first time. We're exploring purchasing properties to do that. Obviously, each child comes with specific complex needs, so one house, even though it has 4 or 5 rooms, may not fit the 4 or 5 kids that come in to the system. But it would be really useful from a scrutiny point of view if you were maybe to allocate a 6-month period with your fellow scrutiny board where you could look at examples from around the country. Officers are doing that already, but if you could do that as a quality piece of scrutiny work to actually propose some measures in which we can look after these most vulnerable people, that would be really appreciated by the administration and those kids in particular.
Thank you. Thank you. I had a couple of questions around staff costs or associated costs. Firstly, I wanted to ask about the forecast variance in achieving the savings identified in the Being Our Best programme and what was being done to address that and whether you're confident that the level of savings will be achieved. And then related to that, I wanted to ask how far agency costs are a factor in terms of our cost pressures in key service areas. And what are we doing to retain and develop permanent staff in these areas to try and, mitigate future risk?
In terms of the first question, so the Being Our Best savings, they've been delayed due to delays in the programme. I think members are aware that the pay and grading exercise took a bit longer, but that has been resolved now and the council's working through the appeals on that, so that's had a knock-on effect in terms of restructuring and staffing structures. So that is being monitored and managed through the Being Our Best governance board, so focus is being kind of given to that area on that one. In terms of agency, I think the relevant service where if there is an increased use of agency, they would be working with our HR colleagues to work out the reasons for that and coming up with a plan to try and address any reliance on agency staff as well. If there's specific areas you want details on, I can follow that up with either the service or HR if that helps.
Okay. Thank you. Hal?
Yeah, I haven't got access to the specific details in terms of placements and that. I do know that the council's appointed an interim assistant director to kind of look at that and look at our processes for placements and reviewing placements and that. So I can, again, ask the service to kind of come back with a specific example of where cost savings have been made through reviewing those placements.
Went off, did it? Okay. Yes. A new concept, flexible capital receipts. How does this work?
Okay, yeah, this was a flexibility that government introduced a few years ago now. Basically, normally you can't use capital to fund one-off revenue costs, but the government, as part of, gave the council flexibilities where capital receipts could be used to fund revenue as long as it met certain criteria. So it was basically to fund transformation costs where that one-off revenue investment led to ongoing revenue savings. So there's strict rules on it, but it is also you need to have the capital receipts available to do that. So examples would be any kind of transformation program on making ongoing efficiencies, staffing changes, and that you could fund from capital receipts rather than funding them from your normal revenue costs.
Right, so if you get a direct profit from what you've done, you can actually take that and put it into this flexible.
Yeah, so if you sold an asset, for example, a property,
Okay.
the receipt you get from that, normally you would only be able to use that on capital expenditure, asset improvements. You could use that to fund the one-off revenue costs of making these service changes or service redesign costs.
Yeah, I give an example of that one, Hal. So, for example, the English Combe Lane project, which is for the most vulnerable adults in our society, that will deliver significant revenue saving to the adults budget when it's completed. So in the capital build project, you could use some of that for staff to implement that project, because it will almost certainly give a large scale revenue return, and that's a good use of capital money in the end. Yeah. So that would be an example of how that would work.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Just touch on heritage. Obviously, the pressure, understandably, from flights, and great to see that Edinburgh have weathered that storm. What can we find out from them? But I know that Visit West is now funded WECA-wise, nothing to do with us. We don't have a tourist office. What marketing budget line do we have for supporting our heritage service activities?
So within the heritage budget, they have an entire marketing team, and we have excellent coverage, not just in the UK but around the world. I think the Jane Austen event this weekend proves that we have a huge draw to the city. There is a national body, I can't remember what it's called, ALCA or something it might be called, which we are a member of, and within the heritage team they have staff that are paid within the team to do their marketing and strategy. So we're aware of the need to push that, and actually we're outperforming. But I will ask Rob directly why Edinburgh is a outlier compared to everywhere else. Yeah, it's interesting that normally I think we're finding so that the coaches from London that arrived on the tour through Stonehenge and then came to us and then went back, they're not necessarily that great for general tourism in Bath, but they're finding from the tour operators of the buses that those buses that used to have 50 plus people on have now got 30 plus people on coming from London, and that is a direct connection to people flying into London and connection to the museums as well in London being down. So that's a significant impact from those one-day visitors. I believe that overnight stays have increased significantly, and also, which is really great news, people using their local residence card, that's also spiked as well, so because we've had extra publicity on that locally.
Thank you. Toby?
Thank you. I was suggesting to the panel that we might need to look at the council tax reduction scheme again because of the transition that some people are undergoing from ESA to universal credit and getting less council tax reduction. I don't suppose you're on top of the detail figures, but do you have any feel for the level of arrears in council tax, or whether the collection rates are holding up?
Yeah, I haven't got specific figures in front of me. As I understand it, I think collection figures are generally holding up. Again, I can find those figures for you if you want them. I think in terms of the cost of LCTS, we're slightly under budget this year, but that obviously doesn't tally through to collection rates, and that's a different question. So.
But when you say under budget, you're giving less discounts than...
In terms of people's entitlement to the...
Yes.
Yeah, is slightly lower than we were anticipating when the tax base was set for this year's budget.
That's probably because we didn't factor in this transition. So that's useful that we're not counting on it for money. Yeah. Okay. In terms of the table on page 28, are the figures, have those been updated since June to allow for month 4 data?
The main update to those forecasts we're currently doing at the moment, so we do it at Q2. So the finance team and the service managers are kind of working on that currently, or they will be over the next 2 to 3 weeks. Once we get to the end of September, that will be the 6 months of data. So that's when the detailed work on that and the updates to those will be available.
Thank you, Chair. With regards to council tax, so we have, with most university towns, there's an impact on the amount of students that are using our houses. Students are obviously very welcome and they bring a lot to the economy and culture of the city. But with the government's fairer funding review, and rightly so, I'm not knocking the government on this one, they're looking at transferring large funds of money to where there are greater pockets of deprivation. That normally means transferring more money to the northern councils, and that's to the detriment of the southwest and the south in general. So along with other university cities, we are lobbying the government to calculate that into their fairer funding review for university cities, because we have, I think, something like almost 30% of the population of Bath is students when it's full. So that is something we are lobbying government on, specifically to make sure we get a fairer slice of the government pie.
Thank you. Yeah, just looking down at the risk sections on page 32 at the moment, and the contract inflationary pressures and things there. if we're getting these pressures and things coming through and there is a risk of those going and affecting capital schemes, how are we deciding which of those capital schemes are affected or and maybe paused as a result of that impact?
In terms of capital schemes, the majority of those would have a project-specific contingency to manage that risk. So the project team and the project board would be reviewing any cost increases against that project contingency first. If the project can't contain that within those contingencies, then that would have to be escalated. We do have a corporate capital contingency that's available as well across the whole programme. This was all referring to a revenue pot, which was more to do with the day-to-day revenue as well. The capital programme ones are normally managed within the contingency allocated within those capital budgets.
Okay, and it does say that they might need to be paused. That's fine. Then my follow-up question on that would be, is we've got this risk table and things here. I think in terms of those high impact risks and things there, I think there's only one with a figure against it, and that's the top one, which is 4 million. Are we talking about the impact of each of those high risks being of that sort of order if they occur?
So the corporate contingencies, well, we've got 4.2 for the demand and cost pressures. There's 3 million to do with savings delivery, and I think it was about 2.5 to do with the inflation. So that, I think they're actually in here. Yeah, so that's the 9.8 that's referred to earlier in the report.
Okay. And just one more. So I know this report originally went to Cabinet in July. Is there anything key which has changed in the risk environment since then which we should be aware of now?
I think looking more forward, fair funding, the changes to our kind of grant position next year are probably, the government has started consultation on that. It's still unclear the exact impact on us, and we're unlikely to know definitively until November, December time on that. But we are kind of modelling that, and we are using some external consultants that are working with government and trying to find the cost of that. So I would say, you know, all these other risks are still ongoing in terms of the pressures we talked about and that, but on our funding streams, fairer funding is probably the main thing that's changed in the last. Okay,
but you've not got anything which has come through in the last couple of months which is knocking risks and things here from a sort of amber to burning red, or the red issues which have gone and become much worse?
Nothing yet. Obviously, a caveat that with quarter 2 works going on, but nothing kind of major that's come out of the woodwork.
Okay, one last one. Thank you. And then the final one is, this contains a load of updated forecasts, which are great. What it doesn't have, and would be really useful to go and know or just reassure around those forecasts, is to go and understand some of the actuals and things which are seen so far. How do we build some of those into the future reports which come through, so that that little bit in the back of my head which is saying, how do I know that forecast is right, has got some figures which I can see, yeah, I can see how they're based out.
Yeah, the Q2 one, we can build that in. I think the problem with Q2 is you've got the year-end impacts of accruals and actuals actually catching up with the kind of rollover period. So it's quite difficult looking at that actuals to say, is that, you know, 3/12 of a financial year, whereas once you get to year to month 6, that trend becomes a bit more meaningful as well.
So next time round we should be able to...
We should have an appendix with that.
Thank you.
Yes. Good.
Okay, thank you. I'll have a chip in myself now. Just a couple of reminders, I think, to all of us as a panel. First of all, that the Children and Young People's panel are doing, I think it's a Family First task and finish group, which is particularly around children and young people going into care and how to support them outside of the conventional care system. And as a member of the Foster Panel, I don't think I need to declare an interest, but I know it's a piece of work that we're doing in Baines that is getting recognition wider afield. It's quite an innovative piece of work. Questions about capital programme. I've been reminded by Kerry that we've got Tom Foster coming in to talk about capital programme in November. So any specific questions about that are probably there. On the fair funding review, my understanding is from LGA briefings that we're likely to have figures the week before Christmas. I think I was told that a couple of weeks ago. And generally, and on the fair funding figures, that there would be a degree of transitional protection to councils like ourselves who potentially would lose out on reallocation.
Yeah, the original plan, I think, from MHCLG was to try and get figures by the end of November, but the budget announcement saying the budget wasn't going to be until, I think it's November the 28th, has pushed that back. So MHCLG need at least 2 weeks after the budget to actually work through any impacts of that. So yeah, again, we're unlikely to have the provisional settlement until, like you say, just before Christmas on that. In terms of the transition, there is plans to phase in the impacts over the 3 years for people losing. The bit that's unclear for us is in terms of business rates, and we're in 100% pilot. So at the moment, there's potential that there won't be protection for the 100% pilot reductions, but we have responded. We need clarity on that as soon as possible. So our phasing may not be, standing up as much as a transition one. So, but again, the devil's in the detail. So we're awaiting responses from government on that.
Thanks very much. And then specific questions. In the it's paragraph, I'm running back 3.5, and in the portfolio commentary, quite rightly in children's services is highlighted, but it's excluding home to school transport. I know this is quite service specific, but do we have any indication on home to school transport and how that particular budget head is going?
Yeah, there was a rebasing of that because, as you rightly said, I think the budget's almost doubled over the last 4 years on home school transport. It's early days, and a lot of that demand is uncertain until you get the September school intake numbers, although the review at the moment is there doesn't appear to be pressure on that budget yet, but again, we do really need to see the Q2 figures, and the risk here wasn't flagging a significant variance based on the early data, but they are awaiting the September intake numbers and whether that's got any negative impact. So Q2 will be important to see the position on that.
Thank you. And on the general point about how a small number of placements can have a very significant impact on budget, particularly unanticipated ones, because I guess that some placements are anticipated just through children coming through the educational system. As well as placements in, could we have numbers for placements that are ceasing? Because presumably some do. Also, what discussions go on with the NHS about what are placements because of medical need what are placements because of social care need? I know they're certainly pushing to and fro when it comes to elderly adults, but I guess there's a similar discussion with young people with profound needs. And again, I appreciate this is quite service specific.
Yeah, but obviously the service-specific detail we can find out. I do know that the model for demand does track placements in and out. I know we have got a number of transitions from children to adults, so the services are working together on that transition once a child reaches the age where they're then classed by an adult. So, you know, that does carry through as well. So they are monitored. I haven't got specific figures about numbers dropping out at the moment, and I also know that discussions are ongoing with our health partners in terms of health need, who funds what elements of that. But again, the service would be able to provide a more up-to-date update on that, but those discussions are ongoing.
I can add to that, thank you, Chair. So we brought in the new Director of Children's Services, and she's specifically looking at procurement and making sure we get our fair slice of the health budget. And this has been escalated. The Chief Executive is talking to the local Chief Executive specifically on this topic. I think historically other authorities have been a little bit more ruthless in getting a larger slice of the health pie than we have. So those negotiations are at the highest level and they're ongoing, and the new director is specifically looking at that to make sure we get a fairer slice of the health budget.
Thank you for that. And the final bit from me is just to follow on from the discussion that was going on about international visitors, which is interesting, how trending up and down on Bath and Edinburgh and the rest. I mean, I've read reports in the national press, and I don't know whether this is just anecdotal or not, that there's a drop-off in visitors from the US. Has that been spotted, and is that likely to continue?
There was a general drop-off in US visitors, but I think this summer has actually spiked. I don't know whether that's because of our presidential visits and vice-presidential visits. I'm not too sure on that one. But we can have the specific data. The Rowan Bath keep a really good log of exactly where people are from, but in particular with the feedback, because they have to fill in their postcode and points of origin. So we do have some quite interesting data. But last year in particular, there was a national drop-off of US visitors. But I think it's gone back to normal this summer, but we can confirm that. Yeah.
If we could separate out visitors and asylum seekers from the US, then that would be interesting. Is there any other point to be made on the Q1 monitoring report? If not, thank you very much for that report. Look forward to Q2. Look forward being a sort of broad term to use. And then going on to agenda item 10, which is the procurement update. Cheryl?
Thank you, Chair. Cheryl Hansford, Head of Procurement. Just got a few slides, but just before I put those up, we last provided a procurement update to corporate PDS in May 2024, and we outlined anticipated legislative changes and shared early insights into the new procurement strategy that was in development at that time. So since then, the procurement legislation has now come into force. That's been in place for 6 months. And the organisation formally adopted the new procurement strategy towards the end of 2024. So we're now delivering against those objectives. So the purpose of today's presentation is just to give you an update on those two items. Also, just to mention briefly an overview of a recent Cabinet Office consultation that's taken place around further proposed reforms to procurement legislation. Slides are just incoming. Okay, so if I can just run through a presentation, if I can just go through that in full first and then take any questions at the end, if that's okay. So starting off with a quick update on the Procurement Act 2023, so that's the new legislation that came into force in February after a long journey through the House of Lords, House of Commons, etc. And it's probably the biggest legislative change in a public procurement context for about a century. The intention of it was to create a single piece of legislation rather than having numerous acts and sets of regulations, as was previously the case. So the Procurement Act, as I say, kicked in the end of February. It has applied to procurement activity that commenced since that date, so since the 28th of February, 24th of February even, sorry. Anything that commenced prior to that date continues to be governed by the previous legislation, which was the Public Contracts Regulations. So we are in a world at the moment where we've got two pieces of legislation because the old legislation still continues to apply and will do for a number of years, actually. We also use a range of procurement routes to the market, and some of those were set up under the previous regime. And where that's the case, it's the previous regime that will still apply rather than the Procurement Act. So, yeah, it's a bit of a juggle at the moment. The strategic procurement team have been working on implementation of that Act for the organisation alongside elements of our procurement strategy and work to ensure that the organisation was ready for go live in February. So most of the provisions of the Act are now in force, but there are a few that haven't yet kicked in, relating to payments compliance and various bits of reporting that relate to both payments and contractual performance. So, there are a few bits still to come. Also, just worth noting that despite the intention to have one set of legislation, the Procurement Act actually isn't the only set of legislation. We also have the provider selection regime, and that covers procurement of healthcare services. So in our case, that affects some of our public health services and potentially some services commissioned by social care alongside healthcare. So in terms of the things that have been delivered in readiness for the Act, the strategic procurement team have worked to complete relevant training that's been Cabinet Office delivered, as well as a number of other key officers across the Council who are involved in kind of procurement activity regularly. And we continue to engage in sessions that the Cabinet Office are providing now. We have got our organisation set up on the Central Digital Platform, which is the platform that has been released for all public sector procurement activity. And we're up and running on that, publishing notices, etc., ensure that that integrates with our e-tendering system and that all works seamlessly. We've also reviewed our external-facing web pages and our internal-facing intranet pages to reflect the changes of the Act. And the templates that are used by officers in procurement activity have also been produced where new templates were required or updated and reviewed to make sure that they fit with the new Act. That includes a review of our standard terms and conditions, again, just making sure that they align with the Procurement Act, which introduced a range of implied terms into contracts. We now have an obligation to publish a pipeline notice, so that's a mandatory notice detailing our upcoming procurement activity, only where it exceeds a certain threshold, so it's not every single bit of procurement activity, but we've published our first pipeline notice and that will be updated moving forward. So ongoing, we continue to look at then our payments compliance. So as I said, that requirement isn't yet enforced, but we do know that that kicks in now from the 1st of October. So on a 6th monthly basis, we'll need to publish information about payments compliance. That's essentially the speed of payment against invoices. We are looking at our contract management processes, ensuring that we've got the right information to publish the required notices throughout the life of the contracts. That's a key change of the Act, that it requires us to publish information throughout the life of the contract, not just at the point of procurement. We are updating upcoming contracts that will require additional input, both at tendering and contract management stage, and we continue to collate the pipeline, as I mentioned earlier, so that we can update that pipeline notice on a regular basis. We have reviewed our invitation to tender documents, invitation to quote documents, with the aim to remove barriers to SMEs and also then to support the changes that were made to the contract standing orders recently that encourage engagement with SMEs and local suppliers at higher values than were previously allowed in the earlier version of our contract standing orders. Essentially then, for each procurement process that the strategic procurement team are involved in, we need to look carefully at designing that process to ensure compliance, but also to ensure that the flexibilities of the Act are applied where it's appropriate to do so. So that's obviously on a case-by-case basis. So as I said, there has been a recent piece of consultation. So whilst the Procurement Act is only just over 6 months old, there has been a consultation on further reforms which would build on the Procurement Act and align with the government's industrial strategy. So that consultation only closed recently. Clearly, we don't know what the outcome of that will be, and we'll have to look at that as and when that's confirmed to consider how we deal with those changes and react to those. But the sorts of things that were included in the proposals were around prompt payment, being able to exclude bidders who can't demonstrate prompt payment of subcontractors, some increased flexibility for people-focused services, and by that they mean social care. Some proposed changes around social value include setting of minimum weightings in evaluation processes and a focus on jobs, opportunities and skills. So as I said, the consultation period has only just finished, but the understanding is that that may result in legislation to amend the Act or to introduce minor technical amendments. Okay, so now move on to give an update on the procurement strategy. So as you may recall, the Council adopted a new procurement strategy towards the end of last year, and that came into force on the 1st of November 2024. We've made some good progress in delivering against the strategy, obviously alongside the fairly intense work on the Procurement Act implementation. But the adoption of the strategy, on adoption of the strategy, we've worked with the Procurement Steering Group to look at prioritising the deliverables and agreeing the activities that we would focus on in the kind of immediate term. So in terms of the progress we've made, we have conducted a review of the contract standing orders, as I mentioned earlier. So that was in the main, to ensure compliance with the Procurement Act, but also with the newly adopted procurement strategy. And this included introduction of some procurement gateways, and they will help to ensure detailed planning ahead of procurement activity and appropriate governance. As I mentioned earlier, our tender templates have also been reviewed and revised, and work is ongoing with colleagues in our sustainability team to establish some minimum standards for contracts. We have collated and continue to update the contracts pipeline, as I said. So we've got two versions of that. One is a version that's uploaded to our internet page, so it's publicly available for all suppliers out there to see, but hopefully particularly useful to local and smaller suppliers. And we're publishing that information kind of voluntarily. The mandatory bit then being the pipeline notice that I mentioned earlier that has to be put onto the central digital platform, which we have to do to comply with the Procurement Act. In terms of training, as I said, the procurement team have been engaging with all training and development opportunities around the Procurement Act, including that's been delivered by the Cabinet Office, but also other sessions that are being put on quite widely, webinars, etc., by legal firms, as well as obviously engaging with colleagues in other authorities to share good practice. So in order to support our engagement with the local supply market, the recent CSO change is allow and in fact encourage officers to invite local suppliers to quote at higher values than they were previously able to. So where we are able to invite suppliers rather than run publicly advertised processes. And as I say, the values at which that can be done have now increased. So over the next 6 months, in terms of the strategy, 2 main areas of focus. They are social value and supplier and contract management. So we'll be looking to review the Council's social value policy, develop officer guidance and toolkits, and ensure that social value is embedded into procurement processes. And then we are also working on a consistent approach to contract management across the organisation through implementation of a contract management framework. We've now got some dedicated resources at a corporate level to support that work. So they are recently in post, but they're looking now to understand our current position and looking at the tools and systems that we can implement to support a more consistent and robust and risk-based approach to supplier and contract management. Okay, and that's it in terms of the update. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was very, very comprehensive, very informative. Thank you. Good to hear that what progress is being made and ongoing. Any questions, Toby?
Thank you. Yes. I mean, it's really welcome that the social value work is going forward, and that more emphasis will be put on letting contracts to SMEs and voluntary community sector. But what I don't think I picked up was changes in the arrangements for member involvement, and particularly cabinet members and the cabinet itself. And our former colleague Deborah Collins was very keen that we should follow other authorities and be much more proactive in treating contract letting as an activity which needs input from elected members. Not in terms of which contractors should be chosen, that's too risky, but in the terms of procurement design. And I'm not getting a feel that there is a plan for member involvement in procurement design.
Okay, yeah, so the review of the contract standing orders that was conducted earlier in the year, as part of that there was conversation and consultation with the Constitutional Working Group. Part of that was, yes, to pick up the issue around member involvement. And what that resulted in was introduction of some gateways. They've now been built into the contract standing orders. And they essentially then build in that member involvement into certain procurement processes at the point of design. So, yeah, there would be a commissioning plan that a lead member would be involved in signing off, and then after that point, that will be developed by officers into a procurement plan, so the more kind of detail before the tender is published and goes to the market. So certainly the changes that were made to the CSOs reflected the conversations and the consultation with the Constitutional Working Group at the time, and they agreed those proposed CSO changes before they were signed off by full council in May.
I think, I mean, I'm a member of that group as well, and so is the chair. But I think we regard this as a first stage. And want to go further. I've certainly not seen any key, there may have been, but I haven't seen them, or I can't recall them, key decisions published that says this big contract is coming up and it's a key decision to, and therefore published on the weekly register, and that talks about how we are going to let that contract. Nor have I seen anything on the Cabinet agenda.
Yeah, thank you, Toby. It is something that Mark is working on with the new director, Simon Parker, to put a cap figure. So, hypothetically, £250,000 would require a political insight at the start of the process. Obviously, nothing to do with who wins the contract, etc., because that would be wrong, as you stated. But there would be a political impact into that. And that would be around the sense of exactly what this new legislation is all about, is would we want as cross-party councillors that weighting should be given to the local charity sector above a national charity organisation? Should it be preference be given to a small or medium-sized business over a national company? I think the answers would be yes from a cabinet position. But that you are right. Those discussions are ongoing at the moment, and will probably coming down the line.
That's very good, but it's only part of the problem, because it's that's about what sectors are invited to deliver and what how that works. But it doesn't. The other thing which we need to look at is the scoring systems. The weight to be given to cost and quality, and what we mean by quality. So Deborah's paper, sets out, for instance, that some things would be built into the specification. The example she gives was that highway works have got to allow for safe cycling, and that would be a requirement under the contract. It wouldn't be scored, it would be yes or no. Similarly for social services, you might talk about the key performance indicators and what scores are given to ability to meet certain KPIs. So I think there's a lot more to do to get a grip on procurement design, but it's welcome that there's already been a start involving members.
Chair, could I just to add that obviously we do just need to bear in mind that we aren't able to give preference to any particular organisation or sector in procurement. So once we get certainly above threshold, so we're in the Procurement Act, we have to treat everybody equally and fairly. So that, it's just something to bear in mind.
Always useful to remind ourselves as we're on a public webcast. Malcolm.
Yep, really good to hear about the change in limits there for engaging local suppliers. Do we have any forecasts for how much extra business we think that means will go to lanes-based businesses?
Not at this stage, no. It's only been in place for a couple of months, so very early to tell at the moment what that impact would look like.
Okay. It would be really good to hear once it's had time to establish how much of a difference in things that's made. Thanks.
Any other questions or comments? If not, I will chip in then. Again, thank you for the report, and thank you for the discussion detail about local supply, because there is as you said, there's a clear balance here between the legal requirements of the legislation and what we do, and the outcomes we want to get, but within that legal framework. So just a couple of questions, really. I know that within the legislation, contracts are not supposed to be broken down in size. If that split is in order to assist a single supplier sidestep application processes and whatever. But I think one thing that's been highlighted by the voluntary sector is that smaller contracts are more winnable by smaller organisations just simply because of capacity or overstretching themselves. So I wonder if you've got any thoughts on how contracts and size of contracts are being modelled in a way that makes them accessible to SMEs and to the community voluntary sector. And I wonder what discussions have been taking place. I've had a number of chats over the last few weeks with local vol sector organisations. I think we know, and it's recognised, that the larger the organisation, and particularly the national, international ones, the more chance there is of those organisations having dedicated bid writing teams. And actually a key element of that is early notice to everybody, but particularly to smaller organisations, which gives them the ability to work through data collection, maybe employing a bid writer for a couple of months to get a bid up to speed in order to be able to compete, if that's the right way of putting it. And I know that I've had concerns expressed to myself about some small organisations are worried that particular contracts will be announced late on in the process, and they're worried whether they'll have time to respond appropriately. Whether that's right or anecdotal, but it's certainly a concern that's been expressed to myself. Also, I suppose a bit of the elephant in the room is our engagement with the NHS through the integrated care boards, the now larger integrated care boards, who I don't see any indications that they're going to move into a smaller local supply model for procurement. And I suppose in terms of the larger ICBs, local means a lot bigger than what we think of as local. But I guess as well, and this is more a question for Kevin as it is for you, Cheryl, where Baines officers are involved in discussions with our NHS colleagues about procurement and involved in that process, whose policy is the I saw you looking to your to your right there, whose policy takes precedence, and I would suggest the policy of the organisation that pays them takes precedence.
I think you answered your own question there. Yeah, normally, if it's like a 70-30 contract, it would probably be the NHS that would be leading on the procurement, or if it was 70-30, it would be us that's leading on it. I would agree with you that the NHS procurement is favoured more towards large corporate contracts rather than local contracts, and that's something that needs to be looked at.
No, I don't think nothing to add on that point, Nick. Thank you, Chair.
Any other questions? Yes, Colin.
I suppose just really a question on clarity. Just presume that our wholly owned property development company, Aqueous, are outside of these procurement rules. Just a clarification.
No, they wouldn't. They would be inside of the procurement rules because they would be deemed to be a contracting authority. So the rules will apply to them as well.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that report and thank you for that discussion. Then moving on to the panel work plan. We did have a discussion prior to this meeting starting. Thank you, Kevin. And we're looking at the November meeting, the council tax reduction scheme update coming to November rather than the IT report. The IT report will shuffle across. I think as we discussed earlier, the budget being the last few days in November and the settlement figure coming probably two to 3 weeks later, means that there won't be much, if any, discussion on detail of budget preparation. We'll have some discussion about budget in November, but most of that will be coming in January when we get clearer figures and a rollout of those figures as it affects Baines. So looking in January for that. There's the capital update in November as well, but that's already on the circulated plan. Any comments or any suggestions more on panel work plan? Toby?
In the past 2 years, we've had 2 meetings in January, one for budget, one for other work. Is that planned? And if so, can we get them in the diary sooner rather than later?
I think the intention is, and it was we had last year, is that there are specific budget commentary that we will want to make as a panel on the area of our responsibilities, and that will be a first week meeting in January. But then there is a meeting that's convened by ourselves, including the other two panels, to come up with a holistic a response to the budget proposals. That's the second meeting. The first meeting, we can have a specific budget discussion, but and there will be time for other budget items in that January meeting. It's the second meeting, January, isn't really a meeting of ourselves. It's a meeting of all three scrutiny panels to collate the all three sets of comments to go to full council. Yep.
Looking at the dates, because the Cabinet meeting isn't until the 12th of February, where the draft proposals for the 26th of December go, I think the 3rd of February probably looks as a second date, and we keep the 27th.
Yeah.
And that'll work well then in terms of, rather than going earlier, because if we went for the 20th, then we'd be looking to Gary and the team to publish a draft report sort of just after Christmas. So I think the 3rd of February looks like the date that I think Michaela will circulate that.
I can put that out straight away if we
Officers have got the 26th and 27th of December. I'm sure that we can be drafting something up. Yes, that's...
So two early winter meetings, but you'll choose the dates, that's fine.
Yes. There will be those two meetings before the budget, one to consider our specific budget responsibilities, for want of better putting it, and then the combined meeting.
First meeting for other business as well.
The first meeting, but yes, we'll have other business in that as well. It won't be a wholly budget meeting. Okay. Any other comments? Any other suggestions on panel work plan? Jess?
I just wanted to pick up on the point that Kevin made about some of the costs, or rather the market, I suppose, in some of the social care packages. And I've been trying to think it through in the meeting, what we could usefully add. And I guess I'd welcome other people's thoughts on whether that's something they feel this panel could look at, scrutinise a bit more, and what the starting point for that might be. I personally think I could benefit with some explanation, first of all, about how those packages are currently found and who the providers are, and then perhaps we might be able to look at what it is that we need to examine further.
Yes, I mean, it's considering that it's the budget head that for the last few years is the one that's causing most pain and anguish. What I would suggest is that the LGA, the Local Government Association, have done some work on sharing best practice. There's been a recent change in the areas of responsibility of the LGA boards, but it may well be worth looking at good practice in other areas. So sorry, Kerry, can we look at any work that's been done by the LGA? I think as well there was, well I know as well, there was a report into SEND that was done by the LGA, particularly examining how the rate of diagnosis in the UK appears not to be tracking the rate of diagnosis in other European countries. Yeah, I think that's a useful addition to our work plan. Thank you. And it is now coming up to 5:10. Sorry, Hal, we can't rescue you from your Keynsham Town Council meeting by keeping you here till 8, so you'll have to attend. Thank you all for attending, and see you next month.